Welcome to the Lawyers Talk Show on TASCTV, the voice of the Turkish American community. My name is Erol Gülistan, and I'm an attorney in New Jersey. Thank you to everybody who tuned in to the show last several weeks. The feedback for the show has been great, and I want to thank the incredible team here at TASCTV for their efforts and incredible vision that they have. And thank you also to TASC and everyone whose efforts made this and other shows on TASCTV possible. If anyone has any questions for our guest, feel free to submit it on YouTube under the live chat feature, where the show is also being streamed. We start off today's show by thanking Turkish Americans and Muslim Americans, healthcare workers who put their lives on the line every day during this once-in-a-100-year pandemic. I also want to take a moment today to remember all of the lives that were lost as a result of this virus. And I also want to remind everybody in the public, we're almost there. Don't forget to mask up, and I encourage everybody here to get a vaccine. Our guest today is Mr. Selaedin Maksut, who is Executive Director of CARE New Jersey. CARE is the Council on American Islamic Relations, a nonprofit, grassroots, civil right, and advocacy organization. CARE is America's largest Muslim civil liberties organization with affiliate offices nationwide. Its national headquarters are located in Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And since its establishment in 1994, CARE has worked to promote a positive image of Islam and Muslims in America. And through media, relations, lobbying, education, and advocacy, CARE works to make sure a Muslim voice is represented. And through their work, they seek to empower American Muslims and encourage their participation in political and social activism. Welcome, Mr. Maksut, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Salam alaikum. How are you?
Alaikum salam. So, Mr. Maksut, what was it like growing up as a Turkish American and Muslim American in America and in New Jersey?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. It really is an honor and a pleasure. And yeah, as you mentioned, we are ethnically Turkish. So I am third generation Turkish immigrant. Actually, my grandparents, they hail from Macedonia. So as many people know, there are a lot of Turks in the Balkans, Macedonia, Bulgaria, and a lot of these Kosovo, Albania, etc. So this is where they come from. And they moved here, and my parents were born here. And as you mentioned, I was born here. Grew up in New Jersey, and went to school here, and kind of grew up in the kind of post 9/11 world. That played a pivotal role in who I've become as a person, and it really shaped my worldview. And tackling Islamophobia ever since I was little. Growing up in a town that is predominantly white and non-Muslim, and coming across a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment and rhetoric, whether it be from, teachers or students and other people that you come across throughout the day. And then going to school here in New Jersey, and then eventually making my way to school at New York University and then Columbia University, focusing on Islamic studies. But yeah.
Excellent. Now, what made you want to get involved with CARE and the Muslim American community and the greater community at large?
Yeah. Prior to my time at CARE, as I mentioned, I was in Islamic studies. Both my undergraduate and my graduate studies were focusing on Islam and Muslim society and Muslim culture. A lot of that was a result of my desire to combat the misrepresentation and the misunderstanding of Islam in America, right? Again, growing up in an environment where Islam is demonized and Muslims are demonized, I sought like answers for the questions that, whether it be in the media or elsewhere. So I went to school for this, right? But then after, a few years in school, my undergrad and my master's program, I thought I'd take a break from school and enter into the kind of civil rights space. And I always thought to myself, academia is an amazing place to learn and to publish and meet amazing people and produce knowledge and just discover new things and have in-depth and critical conversations and nuanced conversations. But what was sorely lacking in my life was like action. I wanted to take action. I wanted to have take tangible steps to resolve the issues that I thought were prevalent in our society here in America. So, I came across the opportunity to join the CARE network, and I was enthusiastic when I applied, and I was even more enthusiastic when I found out that I got the position. And it's been a blessing ever since then. It's been a little over a year now that I've been working with the organization. And essentially what we do is, we take real steps to combating, racism and bigotry and hatred that's targeted against Muslims in America. So it's basically, for me, in a way, I interpret it as, taking what I learned in school and the in-depth conversations and the critical, nuanced academic work, taking that and those conversations and implementing them and allowing that to manifest physically and materially in my life through my work at CARE.
That's important. So one of the things you mentioned and it's a perfect segue into the next topic. Islamophobia is the fear of hatred of prejudice against the religion of Islam or Muslims in general, especially when seen as a geopolitical force or source of terrorism. Some examples of hate acts reported in recent months in the U.S. include hate mail, anti-Muslim graffiti on sidewalks of homes, attacks on mosques, hijabs being ripped off people's heads, vandalization, shots fired at mosques, and death threats over the phone. In the U.S., in the year 2000, anti-Islamic hate crimes were a total of 33 incidents for the entire year. And then in 2001, Islamic hate crimes against Islamic people spiked to 546. And hate crimes against Muslims has been high ever since, despite the overall number of hate crimes decreasing almost in half. Will hate crimes against Muslims ever go back down to pre-9/11 numbers?
Well, that's up to us. It's up to the people, and it's up to the people that are willing to take action. Obviously, the numbers that you describe are alarming, and they're disturbing. And even here in states as blue and as liberal as New Jersey, we see a lot of the things that you describe, whether it's, physical assault against Muslims, especially, Muslim women of color that wear the headscarf, the hijab, and other discrimination, such as employment discrimination, and, continued harassment and discrimination from government agencies like the FBI and the CBP, the Custom Border and Patrol Agency in the airports. So a lot of these things do exist, and Islamophobia is alive and well, even in a state as blue and as liberal as New Jersey. But there is plenty of hope, for our community. We are very active, and the one step that I believe we have to take to combat Islamophobia and hatred of Muslims is to be, in many ways, unapologetically Muslim, right? To have a firm and deep-rooted confidence in our faith and in our community. And a good Muslim is a good American, right? Someone that follows their religion and follows their faith and is good to their neighbors and is contributing to society, maybe engages in humanitarian efforts and philanthropy. American Muslims are in many ways a model Americans. So if we continue to be, the best Muslims, then I'm sure, the rest of America and the rest of the world will, take note of that. And but of course, that's not enough, right? We need to have our advocacy work. We need to have our civil rights work. We need to take on cases of discrimination in the courts, and we need to, have lawsuits to show that we are here and we're not going to be leaving anytime soon, and that we're very serious about what's happening. And we also have to take the battle to the newsrooms, right? And we have to combat, the media's representation of Islam and Muslims. So, as we always say at CARE, from the newsroom to the courtroom, we are combating this bigotry and this hatred, and we're doing all we can, in various different fronts, to let the rest of America know that American Muslims are here to stay, and that we're a part of the society, and that we're part of the fabric of this nation, and that we are enthusiastic to be participating and give back and be unapologetically Muslim and unapologetically American.
And thank you for that. Now, where is a lot of this Islamophobia taking place? Do you find that it's taking place in one sector of society, or is it everywhere?
Well, a lot of the cases that we see are typically employment. So that's one thing. So if a sister has a headscarf, the employer won't allow them, depending on the field of the work, the employer won't allow them to have the headscarf, on site. Or brothers with beards, for example. The beard becomes an issue, and the employer does not, wish to accommodate that individual with a beard. For example, police officers is one thing. Another issue is men and women that are incarcerated in prisons and jails, right? And they're incarcerated, but they still have the right to have a headscarf or have a beard, right? So we're working on these issues as well. And then, of course, FBI. What we see, and from my experience in just a little over a year, the FBI is still very active in the Muslim community in America, both in New Jersey and in many other states across the country. They continue to spy on our community, and they even threaten us, and they intimidate us to act as spies, and they bribe us with monetary gain and capital gain. I have plenty of stories I can tell you where we have local imams that have been approached by FBI agents to spy on their congregation and report back to government agencies. And if they don't cooperate, that they're threatened with legal action. This is actually much more common than people realize. This is, again, FBI working within our communities and trying to really find something that's not there, trying to criminalize Muslims for just being Muslim, right? For just being practicing Muslims. Being a Muslim is just enough of a reason for them to come after us and interrogate us and question us as if we've committed a crime, when in reality we've done nothing wrong. And this is oftentimes the case. Another thing that we often see is, as I mentioned earlier, airports, issues in the airports. Actually, just this past weekend, I got a call from my brother who is a scholar, a Muslim scholar, and this is typically the case for Muslim scholars, to be detained at airports and questioned about their religion and where they're going and where they're coming from and the purpose of their travels. And they're even asked questions about which scholars do they follow, which madhab do they follow, whether or not they agree with certain legal opinions. So really, these are questions that no other community would ever face. We wouldn't see, priests or pastors or rabbis or other religious community leaders be questioned about, things in this way. But really, it's time and time again, Muslim scholars and Muslim community leaders are detained for 4, 5, 6 hours at the airport. And mind you, they are citizens of this country, right? The brother that called me this weekend was a citizen, born and raised here in New Jersey, American Muslim. And he was returning from his trip overseas, and they held him for over 4 hours, asking him nonsense questions, really. So this is really typical of what we see. But there are many other cases, I can describe, even like physical assault. There's one case that came out of New Jersey just last year where a individual rammed his vehicle into a covered woman. She was driving, and he was driving, and they had a tit for tat prior to them getting into the vehicles. He called her a terrorist. He called her ugly, and he said many other things. Why don't you take off your headscarf? Just take off your headscarf. You're in America. And then she, refused to engage in his conversation and his rhetoric and tried to escape from the scene. She went into her car. He followed her with his truck, and he rammed his truck into her car. She did nothing wrong to him. She didn't do anything to him. She didn't touch him. She didn't, shout at him. She didn't instigate him. But yet he had so much hate in him that he thought it was okay to physically attack this woman with a child. And he rammed his truck into hers, and then he fled the scene. Thankfully, police found him later on, and they arrested him. But this really is the reality on the ground, even in, again, as states as blue as New Jersey.
So then that's very scary, what you're saying. I mean, this is the sort of thing that we need to think twice. I mean, what kind of a world do we want to leave behind for the next generation? Doesn't matter what you are, who you are, what background you are, ramming a car with another car with a child in it. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just, unacceptable. Unacceptable. But thank you for sharing that. And moving on, the Patriot Act was written following the September 11th attacks in an effort to dramatically tighten U.S. national security, particularly as it related to foreign terrorism. In general, the act included three main provisions: expanded abilities of law enforcement to surveil, including by tapping domestic and international phones. And thanks to the revelations of Edward Snowden, we know a lot more about the particulars of those systems and the constant monitoring that takes on both domestically here in the U.S. and internationally. Second prong of the Patriot Act, the eased interagency communication to allow federal agencies to more effectively use all available resources in counterterrorism efforts, and increased penalties for terrorism crimes and an expanded list of activities which would qualify someone to be charged with terrorism. The intent of the law was to protect the U.S. citizens and national security. Now, there were also some mistakes and violations of human rights of Muslims by the U.S. federal government. And as we were just discussing, the surveillance of Muslims has skyrocketed post 9/11. And, we now know that innocent Muslims were surveilled many times for years. Other than those examples that you gave, are there any other examples that come to mind that strike you as, this one, really shocks the conscience, or any examples like that?
You mentioned the Patriot Act, and another thing that is relevant to our community here in New Jersey is the NYPD spying campaign that also included spying on New Jersey Muslims as well. I forget the radius out of Manhattan, but it overlapped a lot of North Jersey. So, and still to this day, we still have both NYPD police officers and agents coming into New Jersey and interrogating average Muslims, citizens and non-citizens, about their faith and about their religion, about their background, and asking them very nonsensical questions about things. But again, the Patriot Act, yes. And, speaking of spying on and demonizing and criminalizing an entire community, the Muslim community has been demonized for so long. But now what we've seen is, terrorism and, violence and violent ideologies does not come from the Muslim community, but rather there's been a spike in this type of violent rhetoric and violence from white nationalists and far right wing groups that have taken to the streets and are oftentimes the ones that are taking action against whether it's Muslims or minority groups. Anti-Semitism is another issue that America faces. So white nationalists, whether it be in the insurrection in the U.S. Capitol or prior terrorist domestic attacks that have happened, are being done by groups that are sympathetic to kind of neo-Nazi ideas and really are entirely antithetical to a lot of the principles and the values that America supposedly holds dear. So it's something that we have to take into consideration. Why are Muslims being targeted? Why are Muslims assumed to be criminal when the numbers show that the real threat to America is white supremacy?
So you're right. If we focus on the facts instead of the rhetoric that tears us apart, I think the numbers speak for itself. And, don't you think FBI and other federal agencies would be better served or would have been better served if they were to focus on, extremist threats posed by, white national extremists or extremist leftist groups such as Antifa?
So you have leftist groups like Antifa. I mean, Antifa is it's a much more of a dissolved kind of entity, but I mean, you have a lot of various groups, right? A lot of like you have like the groups that invaded the DC Capitol, for example, and you have a lot of these far right-wing groups as well. But yeah, I mean, we have to steer away from criminalizing a community that has done nothing wrong, right? That has, the only reason for which, they ascribed to spying on them is because of their faith and their identity as Muslims, right? And that should not be enough of a reason to violate their constitutional rights and start spying on them wholesale and entering their houses of worship and threatening local leaders with potential arrests if they don't cooperate with the spying campaigns. So yeah, I mean, look elsewhere. The Muslim community is not. You're not going to find plots of terrorism and plots of violence in the Muslim community in America. So I would suggest looking where it is blatantly it's very obvious, right? It's where it's coming from, and in many cases it is these far right-wing white terrorist groups.
Right. And also, it seems like perception plays a great role in this, because there is kind of a perception in the media. When will we see Muslims stop being portrayed as villains in Hollywood and in other productions?
Yeah, I mean, there is a shift, but it's a slow shift. And I think what a lot of our work at CARE is to combat that negative image, right? So whether it's in Hollywood or just in the media in general, like our local news outlets and national news outlets, trying to combat that negative image of Muslims and Islam and providing a more positive image is a lot of what we do at CARE, right? So providing that positive content and uplifting more positive stories and showing that American Muslims are not or shouldn't be painted as this kind of villain, but rather as people who contribute immensely to society in very positive ways. As I mentioned earlier, humanitarian efforts is a big part of the American Muslim community, giving back and a lot of philanthropic efforts. So these are stories that we can show as to counterbalance the media's effort to, again, demonize or vilify American Muslims. And yeah, I mean, Hollywood also has a lot of work to do. I think now what we're seeing is, and we don't have to go too much into this, but this a lot of tropes and kind of stereotypes of Muslim women taking off their headscarves because they fell in love with this maybe a white young man, and he's an American, and so they fell in love, and she's giving up her Muslim identity and her faith for the sake of being with a young white gentleman. So there are new tropes and new stereotypes that are kind of coming about. We might see the charges of terrorism being dropped, but now we're leaning towards maybe more liberal tropes that seek to kind of whitewash or just play down faith, as if American Muslims don't care about their faith and they're ready to just take off the headscarf to marry a white American man. But yeah, Hollywood has a lot of work to do, and Hollywood has always had a lot of work to do. But we're here to combat any of those tropes and stereotypes and negative images. But yeah.
Right. And I do remember even here in the US, up until as recent as within the past year, we used to have brands of, they would make waffles, and it went from being called one brand name to another. And then there's also a famous rice company that had a name that was considered derogatory. I've actually noticed in my travels to Europe over the years that in Europe today, that they have products on the shelves and in the market where it writes Turkish pepper or perhaps some other products. And in the image is a stereotypical, Turkish man with a heavy bushy mustache and a fez on the head. And, it's very, stereotypical in today's world of where we're at, how we're in a society of cancel culture now. It's amazing that stereotypes like that have even existed until today. Yeah. Now, moving on to the next topic, there have been many atrocities and, unfortunate tragedies involving, humanity. And it's involved, people of different groups, people who are of Christianity, people who are of the Jewish faith. And do Western and American politicians condemn the multiple genocides against Muslim peoples?
Not enough. Not enough. There are we talk about Islamophobia in America, but Islamophobia is really a global crisis. And what we're seeing is, concentration camps in China, for example, Muslim Turkic groups that are being persecuted and for their faith, right, and for their identity as Muslims. And then we see, again, Muslims being persecuted in Kashmir, right, by a far right-wing Indian group, the Indian government. And then the same thing in Myanmar by far right-wing Buddhist government, and the killings of Muslims in Myanmar. And then the same thing with Israel and Palestinian Muslims suffering at the hand of far right-wing Israeli government. And this is not this is not news to anyone. And then it continues. U.S. imperialism, has led to the deaths of millions of Muslims, whether it be, throughout the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc. And then the, U.S. Kind of proxy wars, even in Yemen and other places. But yeah, there are a lot of Muslims suffering at the hands of, right-wing governments that are persecuting these people because they're Muslim, their identity as Muslims. And again, as I mentioned, China, Kashmir, Palestine, being some great examples. It is, again, Islamophobia really seems to be a global crisis, and one that the U.S. government and other European governments should acknowledge and address, right? And we see even Islamophobia in France as well, for example, in Europe, and the French government, the far right-wing French government, taking steps to demonize the Muslim community in the country and immigrants in that country as well. So it is something that we have to take into consideration, and we have to see, why is this a reoccurring issue throughout the globe? And, what is the U.S. and other Western countries, what are they going to do about it? What is the UN going to do about it? what do we wish for them to do about it? What steps do we need to be taken to mitigate the bloodshed of so many globally?
Yes, thank you for that. Now, in the U.S., do Muslim American school children get Islamic holidays off from school the same way Christian or Jewish Americans do currently?
That's a great question, and it's one that we're actually tackling as we speak. So it varies from state to state, and even within the state, it varies, city to city. So in New Jersey, because we're blessed to have such a large Muslim population, there are a lot of major cities that have given the students off for the two Eid holidays for Bayram. So like Patterson, I think being an example of this, I believe Jersey City, maybe Clifton as well. And then there are other cities and towns throughout the state that do give off for school. But we're working on other cities, for example, like Atlantic City. We're hoping to get them to take the steps to give the students off for the Eid holiday. And then similarly, in that same conversation, we're also working to get like halal meals for students. A lot of schools have kosher options. So we're simply asking for the halal option in a lot of these schools. And in many places, there's a high demand, again, because of the large Muslim population in the state. So yeah, to answer your question briefly, there are a lot of cities that do accommodate for the Muslim holidays, and it is growing. And inshallah, more and more will follow suit and accommodate their Muslim residents.
Yes. Now that was for the question that I asked prior was for school children. Does it make a difference for working adults? I mean, when will they have off for Islamic holidays?
It's a great question. It is a great question, and it's an issue that we see time and time again. Employees asking for their employers off for the holiday, and in many cases they might have to use a paid time off day or a sick day, when in reality they should not have to, right? That should be a given day. Especially for companies that have, a larger Muslim employee base. There are some companies that are progressive in this, and they, will accommodate, and they will, give that time for their employees to take off without being penalized for it, but not enough. And we encourage corporations and companies and businesses, of all shapes and sizes and all fields and disciplines, to consider being a bit more open-minded about it, and consider how you can accommodate your Muslim employees and create a more like welcoming and open environment. And of course, this is good for business, really. I mean, if the employees are happy and the employees are doing well and enjoying their work, then of course, this is just better for everyone all around. But yeah.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned before, as Muslim Americans, we can defeat these stereotypes that exist just by simply being a good neighbor.
Yep.
How can more Muslim Americans be active in their community?
Absolutely. No, it's a great question. And I mean, yes, obviously there are legal cases that we fight Islamophobia and fight it in the media, but really the best way, as you mentioned, to fight, hatred and bigotry and racism and Islamophobia is by just being a good person, by being a good Muslim, by being someone with compassion and with a big heart, and, reaching out to your neighbors. And, for example, the one thing that we do is, whenever it's Bayram or the Eid holiday, we like to give our neighbors some baklava, right? So my grandmother will make baklava, and we'll share baklava with them, because on Christmas they share their treats with us, so we share our treats with them. And then they learn about Bayram, and they learn about the Eid holidays and Ramadan and these things. So just being, friendly with people, it's not that hard. It just involves compassion and the desire to meet new people and explain to them who you are and your faith and your background, your identity, and then of course institutions like mosques, a lot of the Jamilad in the area, should always be doing outreach, and interfaith work is very important. You're just getting down and sitting together with people and talking, and having a meal together. A lot of the Jamilad, the Mesajı in New Jersey, they host iftars, and they invite community members from other backgrounds to join them in the iftar meal during Ramadan. So Mesajid, have a part in this. Individuals have a part in combating Islamophobia, and just being involved in your local community, right? So whether it's volunteering your time with your township, or any kind of volunteer opportunities that arise, there are so many. If anyone is ever interested in getting involved locally, they're always welcome to reach out to our office, and we can always help them find opportunities in their towns and their cities, where they can give back and give their time and their effort. These are the communities that we live in, and we have a responsibility as Muslims and as Americans to give back, right, and to contribute. And again, whether it's humanitarian efforts, or philanthropic efforts, or kind of charity drives or soup kitchens, or any of these initiatives, we should be eager, and we should be really the people at the forefront of these campaigns and these initiatives. We should be, in many ways, we should be leading the efforts, because this is really what our faith calls us to do.
Yes. And in terms of leading the efforts, in addition to the face-to-face interactions and our interactions with the greater community at large, I know that CARE also gets involved with some advocacy work involving, encouraging local Muslim American populations to be active, as well as on social justice issues. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about the Muslim American community being active and social justice, and what it means to exercise our First Amendment rights to assemble and free speech?
Absolutely. This is a very important part of what we do at CARE. And this advocacy work and this this advocacy work ranges from some of the smallest things, like, as you mentioned, advocating to get the Eid holiday off at local levels, like in cities and towns, but also at even state level issues. So one thing that our office was very proud of, we joined a coalition of organizations that was comprised of Muslim and non-Muslim groups that successfully fought and defeated legislation in New Jersey that would have defined anti-Semitism, and in its definition, it would have included the criticism of the state of Israel, right? So this legislation would have prohibited constructive, real critique of the Israeli state in the state of New Jersey, and that would have posed a problem for specifically those in education, right? So students and professors on universities and college campuses. This bill clearly limits our ability to free speech, and our First Amendment right of free speech, as you mentioned, and telling New Jerseyans that you cannot critique the state of Israel, and that is anti-Semitism. This bill failed, thankfully, to our advocacy work, and we spoke to a lot of the legislators in the state, and they agreed that this bill was clearly an insult to the First Amendment, and to our freedom of speech. So this is one example of a lot of the advocacy work that we do and the lobbying efforts that we engage in. But of course, it varies. We speak with local communities and cities and towns to advocate, again, for the Eid holiday, or for halal meals in schools, or for other initiatives and other legislation resolutions. There are some that we're working on right now. As a matter of fact, we're in the process of advocating for Muslim Awareness and Appreciation Month. I believe, from my understanding, California is the only state in America that has a Muslim Awareness and Appreciation Month. So right now we're working on getting New Jersey to be the second state in the nation. So we're working on communicating with state senators and legislators and assembly people to push this resolution through, to get a month like this that will acknowledge the contributions of the Muslim community in New Jersey, and give an opportunity for the state and the local municipalities to honor and raise awareness of the Muslim community in the state, and just again provide a more positive take on the Muslim community. But yeah.
Yes. Now, we're talking about positive things happening. What is the most uplifting thing happening in the world right now?
The most uplifting thing?
Yes.
Oh, it's a good question. Well, I mean, I'm happy to see that the vaccine is being rolled out.
Yes.
That's great, but we could be doing a better job at that, of course. But it's optimistic, and we're hopeful that the vaccine will, be a part of the solution to, mitigating the spread of the coronavirus. So we're hoping that, inshallah, this vaccine is effective, and that it is given to as many people as possible, especially the essential workers and those that are in need of it. But yeah.
And that's a very important topic, because I know with vaccination there could be a lot of misinformation that spreads.
Right.
So here, to anybody in the Turkish American, Muslim American community, the data, the science is on the side of getting a vaccine. I know a lot of people will consider this to be a controversial topic, or it might be a personal, preference or personal topic to some people.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that on one hand, science dictates a certain reality that we have, and there's no denying that. So just wanted to send those positive messages to make sure that the community can get vaccinated and that we can get back to life as normal as quickly as possible. So with that, we're approaching the last few questions that we have here. What are the most important factors in maintaining a well-functioning society?
In my opinion, this is an amazing question, and one that you could probably go on and on about. But in my opinion, it's an educated populace. Education is so important, right? And just providing opportunities and channels of communication in order to educate people about all sorts of things, whether it's, combating the misunderstanding of the vaccine, as you mentioned, for example, right? Or combating, racism and hatred of Muslims or any other minority group. It's just educating the people and providing real facts and combating fake news and, again, misrepresentations of reality, whether it be about minorities or science or religion or anything. It's having serious, real, earnest conversations, maybe vulnerable conversations with people, where people are open-minded and ready to listen earnestly and sincerely, and just educate themselves about their surroundings and the world around them, in order to really understand situations, because everything is very complex, and it can always it has nuance, right? So we should be open to the nuance and the complexities of many things that hold our society back from progressing. So education, making it affordable, making education easily accessible to average people, and just having various groups partaking in educational campaigns, and having people at the table partaking in these conversations is very important in order to have a robust and effective and efficient and prosperous society.
Yes, excellent answer. Before we conclude the show, one of the major themes of the show is how we can improve the world for the greater good of humanity for generations to come. How can we leave it better than we found it for the next generation? And what can we do to have a better world for the next generation?
And this is a great question. I mean, it's a lot of my work, involves, having a degree of compassion, right, and sincerity for the people that we interact with and we engage with. And whenever we want to convey a message to people, whether it's people who like us or don't like us, we have to have a great sense of compassion towards everyone that we come across and respect. So fostering respect and compassion for people in our communications and our dialogue is essential, and it's important. We should want the best for everyone. And we should want what we would want for ourselves, for others. This is a common aspect of the Islamic tradition, for example. So having compassion, having open-mindedness, will allow us to, establish a society and a world that is better than when we first were handed it. But
And I agree with you wholeheartedly, 100%. I think compassion is exactly what we need to leave it better than we found it. One last question.
Absolutely.
What message would you like to send to Turkish American and Muslim Americans?
To my fellow Turks and to my Muslim brothers and sisters, a lot of the message that I always love to give is just be very proud of, who you are. Whether you're an immigrant or, you're a citizen or whatever status you might hold, be proud of your identity, be proud of your faith, be proud of you and your family and where you are at, and be very unapologetic about who you are and about your faith. And don't be afraid and don't feel the need to hide or to kind of erase your identity as a Turkish American or as a Muslim. Allow this identity to be the thing that propels you to be a better person and to give back to society. And we should be eager to participate in civic society and society at large, and we should be eager to give back and to contribute and to be a part of the solution and not the problem, right? We want to be a part of the solution. We want to be a part of the reason why this country is great and not a part of the reason why so many dislike it. We want to be able to give back, and we want to be able to contribute and again, be unapologetic and be firm in your faith and in your identity. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for coming on the show. Before we conclude, there was a quote from Fatih Sultan Mehmet II I ask our audience to consider. In order to see the boundaries of the probabilities, you need to try impossible. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.
Thank you.